Got it.
So number 4. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a moment or two. We'll wait till everybody's entered the room. Got a couple more people coming in, so we'll just give them another minute. Okay. Pamela, is the session being recorded now?
Yes.
Okay. Shall we get started?
I think we should get started.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to the Community Project Funding for 2023 Grantees Cohort Series. This is session 2 on budget. Welcome back. Just some logistics that we want to go over before we get started. These will look familiar, but for those of you who may be joining for the first time or need a refresher, we will be muting everybody during the webinar. So folks will be on mute. However, you can use the chat, and we'll ask you to use the chat throughout this session to provide your questions. The PowerPoint presentation that you're viewing now, you should have received that in your email before the session today, and it will also be available on the HUD Exchange in the next week or so. In the chat, you want to submit your content-related questions to everyone. Make sure over in that chat box, you have it listed as to everyone, and you're encouraged to do questions throughout the presentation whenever they come up. We'll be taking breaks to answer questions. We'll also have a general Q&A at the end of the session. So feel free to drop any and all questions that you have about today's session or even other things related to CPF, and we'll do our best to answer them. Any questions we cannot answer today will be logged, and we will make sure that we follow up to get you answers after the session concludes. So just wanted to do some brief introductions. My name is Jennifer Alpha. I'm a senior consultant with TDA Consulting. I've been working with TDA for about 12.5 years. I've been working on HUD programs for over 20 years, and CPF is one of the things in my list. I also participate in other CPF-related technical assistance, and you'll be seeing me again on the form session. And I will also ask our co-presenter, Stan, to introduce himself as well.
Hello, I'm Stan Fitterman. I've been working with HUD programs and affordable housing and community development for almost 30 years now. I have been doing a lot of work with the CPF, writing some of the guides and doing the budget cohort, and you'll also probably run into me on the environmental one as well in a week.
Okay, thank you. And we have some guests from HUD as well. Connor, would you like to say hello?
Yep. Hey, everyone. My name is Connor LaRoe. I'm a program analyst with the Congressional Grants Division. I primarily work to coordinate on the creation of technical assistance resources for CPF grantees, like the cohort sessions that we're all on today. And I also work as a systems officer supporting the grantee portfolios of our grant officers. And speaking of grant officers, we do have a grant officer on today, Danielle Goldinger, if she'd like to unmute and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle. I am a grant officer and I work with the state of New York. So it's nice to be on this call with everyone and looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We'll also be giving you a cohort overview today and a session 1 recap. So if you did not make session 1, we'll provide you with just a short recap to orient everyone. Then we'll jump into the budget section, which is the main topic of today's presentation. We'll talk about construction and non-construction projects. We'll also talk about budget amendments and DRGR. And as I said, we'll have a general Q&A session at the end as well. All right. So before we get into the get to know you polls, I did just want to flag a little bit of news that you all should have received in the last week. And that is that as of April 15th, if you have not submitted any of your grant materials, you will be transitioning into submitting them via the DRGR system and the grant processing module within DRGR. So you should have received an email on this. There will be more information coming, but just a heads up that if perhaps you did not see that email, make sure you check your inboxes so that you're aware of the process going forward. All right, and with that, we're going to launch some get to know you polls. So, all right, our first poll. Where are you in the grant award process? Have you just started working on your application packet? Have you submitted it, but you asked to revise it? You've been asked to revise it, or are you waiting for your grant agreement from HUD because your package has been fully processed? Right, give folks just one more chance to answer. There's a few folks left to go. Give you another about 15 seconds. Okay, so we've got about 80% of folks just getting started, which would make sense because this cohort is designed to help you through that process of pulling your application materials together. Just a note, as I mentioned, if you have not submitted any of your materials yet, then you will be using the DRGR system to submit your application, and more on that in coming days and weeks. But just keep that on your radar. If you've already started submitting materials, and that's a very, very few, just 10 of you of the whole group of 60 here, you'll continue on with the process that you've already started. Right. So we'll move on to the next poll question. Okay. The next poll question is, have you received any federal funds in the past? This will help us better understand your familiarity with federal funds and the requirements that come along with federal funds. Okay. A few more seconds. And it looks like 62% have received federal funds in the past, so that's going to give you good foundational understanding of how federal funds work and the requirements that come along with them. For those of you who have not received federal funds in the past, there's a little bit more of a learning curve, but a lot of the presentation that we'll talk about today will help with some of that as well. Okay, got another question for you. Have you drafted your budget? So today's session is all about budget. Budget is a key requirement of the materials you'll be submitting to HUD. And so we're curious to hear if you've already drafted your budget. Give everyone about 5 more seconds. Get your answers in. We're about neck and neck here. Let's see where we end up. I'm going to end the poll. And it looks like we've got about 54% who have not started and 46% who have started. So of those who answered, we're about half and half, which is helpful to us because that means some of you may have some good, really detailed questions because you've already gotten started. And some of you are just here to soak up some information about what you need to do as you begin the process. And our final get to know you poll. Have you signed up for the HUD Exchange mailing list? The HUD Exchange mailing list is what's going to keep you up to date on all of the latest and greatest information about the CPF program. If you have not signed up for the mailing list yet, we strongly encourage you to do so. It's a great way to stay connected. And also check your spam and your clutter folders because the first few times you get announcements from that mailing list, they may end up in there. So if you signed up in the past, I'd pop in there, scroll through, make sure that nothing's landing in your junk and clutter folders, spam folders, so that you're sure you're getting the information. And it looks like about most of you who answered, well, 57%, good percentage of you have signed up already. So that's great to hear. For those of you who haven't, definitely jump on the HUD Exchange. You can search for subscribe on the HUD Exchange, and you will be able to walk through the process of signing up for the listserv. You'll want to pick your program. So if you are receiving money from any other HUD programs, you can also sign up for announcements from those programs as well. All right, and with that, we will jump back to the presentation. So just a couple items to highlight for you on the HUD Exchange website, the CPF program page. We've got a screenshot of it here. This is where you're going to access all of your guidance for the CPF program. It is where there will be important links for that guidance, for systems that you need to access to work in the CPF program, on upcoming trainings, all kinds of information. Get familiar with this page. It is where you'll find everything that you need to know about CPF. There is an Ask a Question desk for CPF. This is where you can submit a question on anything related to the CPF program, and an expert will get back to you within a few days. This will give you sort of a direct line to someone who can help walk you through things that might be troubling you with respect to building out your application package and then beyond once you start your implementation. The web address is here. If you go to the HUD Exchange and just use the little search icon and search AAQ, you can go to that page and then walk through the process of identifying the program pool that you want to submit the question to and submit your question. This is a screenshot of the listserv sign up. As you can see, there are many listservs that you can sign up for. When you sign up for the CPF mailing list, you want to make sure that you're signing up for EDI-CPF community project funding grants. And again, the web address is here. You can also search on the HUD Exchange for subscribe, and that'll take you right to this page. So your homework assignment for today, first one, is to sign up for the mailing list if you haven't already. So I'm going to do just a brief cohort overview and then a little recap of the narrative session. So obviously the purpose of the cohort program is to assist CPF grantees in completing the required data for the grant execution and project initiation. There are 4 sessions in this cohort. There is the project narrative session, which was completed already. Those slides and recordings will be up on the HUD Exchange shortly. The budget session, which you are in right now, we'll be talking about budget today. There is also an office hours session that corresponds to each of the cohort sessions. The office hours session for budget will be on April 25th from 2 to 3 Eastern time. On April 30th, we'll have the environmental session, and then we'll be back for forms on May 21st. So session 1 recap. So in session 1, you learned that there are some key components to the narrative. The narrative itself is, there is no prescriptive way in which you need to complete the narrative. However, there are areas that you have to address. So those areas that you need to address include the project description, project metrics, project timeline and status, and then proposed subrecipients. So I'm going to talk just a couple minutes about each of these areas. So for the project description, you want to make sure that it matches the joint explanatory statement. And you want to make sure that you describe all of the actions that will be undertaken as part of the project, regardless of the funding source. So even those pieces of your project that are not being funded with CPF, if it's part of the project, you want to describe them. So again, you're talking about your project in the entirety and giving a description of that entire project. For the metrics, you want to have clear goals and outcomes and state them in your narrative. For activity types that trigger Section 3, you're going to include metrics for total labor hours, Section 3 labor hours, and targeted Section 3 labor hours. And then for your timeline and status, you want to provide an explanation of where you are in the project lifespan. So some projects may already be underway, so you want to describe where you're at in the overall implementation of the project. You want to provide an estimated start and end time for your projects, and any steps that you've already taken towards environmental review, you want to describe that in your timeline as well. And then finally, if you are using subrecipients to implement your project, you want to describe their roles and the scope that will be handled by each of your subrecipients. For more information on the narrative section, you can obviously consult the grant guide and also go back to session 1 slides and review the recording for session 1. And as I said, that will be posted on the HUD Exchange shortly. And with that, I will turn it over to Stan to get us started on budget. Stan, did you want to share your slides or would you like me to advance these?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I can share if you'd like.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Everyone is seeing my slides, I trust.
Yes.
All right. All right. So line item budget. It must be submitted with the grant agreement. It needs to include uses for the entire project. You can accomplish this by having 2 columns, one that's with the heading of CPF and one that says non-CPF. And the total amount of the CPF funds have to equal the amount of the CPF award. So round up, round down, do what you need to do, but the CPF funds need to match the amount of the award. The budget needs to be consistent with the project narrative and that joint explanatory statement, the JES. So for example, if we say in our narrative that we're going to do construction, then we need to have a line item for construction in our budget. If we say we're going to do rehab, if we say in our narrative that we are going to fund staff to implement services, then we need to have a line item in our budget that pays for staff. And we've got a link here. We all have a copy of this presentation. You have a link to where the joint explanatory statement is, and the HUD recipients begin on that page, S9406. All right. You can create your own budget format. There is no mandatory budget format. And by Excel or Word, we of course mean a spreadsheet or a Word doc, a word processing document. So Google Docs, Google Sheets. The grant officers have told us they prefer them in Excel because it's easy for them to double check the math that they're in Word. They have to pull out a calculator and start adding things up. So to make it easier on your grant officer, please submit it in the spreadsheet format. If you haven't created your own, you can also use the forms, the budget forms from grants.gov. There's one for non-construction, there's one for construction. If you're doing both construction and non-construction work with your CPF activity, you may need line items from both of those. We're going to look some examples in just a minute. But we've also gotten here the link of where those forms live. All right, Jennifer, can you do the polls even though you're not sharing? Okay. All right, we're seeing how did Shane's mailing list question? Still seeing the wrong question. I don't know about anybody else.
Oh, sorry, I was talking on mute. Sorry about
Okay.
that. It shows that all my polls are ended. Let me try to start the next one and hopefully it'll
Okay.
just kick that one out. Okay, 1 second. I just have to find the first one. There we go. Okay, here we go. Are you
Okay,
seeing the
all
next
right.
one? Great.
Yes, the budget must include uses for the entire project with the CPF and non-CPF funds identified separately. Is that a true statement?
Consensus building here.
All
Give everybody a
right.
few more seconds to chime in. All right.
Y'all are good. 100% got that one right. The budget must include uses for the entire project.
I think this is the first time that everybody's gotten it right.
I think you're right. This is a smart group. All right, what's next? Let's see if we can keep it rolling.
Next one, 1 second here. A little bit slow on the launch, but here we
All
go.
right. So SF 424 forms for budget information may be used, must be used, or cannot be used when for our CPF budget. I think we were there.
Yep, got about the right number. So here are the results.
So they may be used as a template. There is no required budget format for the CPF program, but you can use the SF 424 forms, but you do not have to. All right, good job. So about 70% of y'all got that one correct.
Great. Let me go back and do the next question here. We've got question number 3 up now.
Oh, there we go. Okay. The budget does not need to be consistent with the narrative nor the joint explanatory statement, provided the budget includes an explanation of the differences. All right, another 5 seconds. Yeah, all right. We just broke our record. We're up to 49. Okay. So That is an extremely false statement. One of the more false things I've ever put in print. The budget must be consistent with the narrative, and it must be consistent with the joint explanatory statement.
There you
All right. Good job, everybody. Okay, moving on. So here's a sample construction budget format. This is from the SF 424. Again, note at the bottom, this is a sample and not a required form. So I just kind of want to walk through a couple of the line items for you just to give some explanations of where these come from. So admin and legal expenses, any attorney fees you have of setting up, if you're setting up an LLC or a separate organization to be the developer or the implementer, you have legal expenses to do that. Your admin cost that goes in this is number one. If you're buying land, buying right-of-ways, paying for an appraisal, the soft costs associated with acquisition of land or buildings, that's what goes here. In some cases, you may have to relocate an existing business or existing tenants. If you're doing that, then that would go in number 3. Straight up architectural engineering fees are number 4. So whatever the architect and the engineer are charging you. Other architectural engineering fees is for things that are not architectural engineering, but are usually done by those firms. It could be soil tests, it could be studies, it could be surveys that were done those firms, but they're not architectural engineering expenses. When we build things or rehab things, we often pay for inspections, not just from the building inspector who's coming out to make sure we're up to code, but oftentimes we will have our own inspector, or our funders will require, if another funder may require an inspection, therefore, which is where we put our inspection fees. Site work, getting the site ready for construction, leveling, bringing in soil, removing soil, demolition and removal, any things that you're going to tear down and get rid of. This is number 9, is we put what our actual construction cost is. If we're buying any equipment for the development. Miscellaneous, anything that is not included in 1 through 10. We then have our subtotal line on line 12. Line number 13 is contingencies. In doing construction or rehab, we always want to have a contingency because there are things we don't know. A bit of a safe harbor for both those. For rehab is usually 10% of the hard cost, 5% of soft cost. New construction is usually 5% for contingencies of both hard and soft cost. If we anticipate program income, which many of us won't, but if we anticipate program income that's going to reduce our amount from CPF, we would put that here, subtract that from the subtotal, and we've got our total project cost. And as you can see, we've got just two columns, CPF funds and non-CPF funds, and then we'll add them together for the total. Okay. And here's the sample non-construction budget. Personnel, what people are going to actually cost us. What's the staff? If someone's going to be working 50% of their time on the CPF funded activity, then 50% of their personnel costs or their costs would go in the CPF column. Fringe benefits. This in 2 CFR Part 200 is the federal part of the federal code that covers overall administration of federal funds. And in there, they have a very good description of what counts as fringe benefits, but it's retirement, it is vacation, it is insurance, health insurance, it's workers' comp, it's FICA. Those are all things paid on behalf of an employee, and many of them are formulas. Some of them, like health insurance, is going to be based on what your agency or your local government pays. Anticipating any travel associated with this activity. Equipment, anything that costs more than $5,000 is equipment, unless you have a policy in your own agency that has a lower number. But from the federal standpoint, anything more than $5,000 and has an effective useful life of more than a year, that is considered equipment. Supplies are less than $5,000. Laptops are supplies now. Printers would be supplies now. So that means you wouldn't have to treat them like equipment, tag them, inventory them, and find them every year. Supplies, you don't have to do that. Any subcontractors you're going to have or pay, anything that's not included, that's in your any line items that are in your budget, but aren't in A through F. Then we're going to have our total direct charges. Next, we're going to have indirect charges. We're going to talk about that on the next slide, but we'll put in our indirect charges and then total that up and have a total, what our total amount is for each, both CPF, non-CPF, and the total activity. Okay. And so these are sample items, line items that should cover many activities. You can, of course, add to them. You can subtract from them. But it is kind of, this gives us the level of detail HUD's expecting. Okay, so indirect cost. These are costs incurred for a common or joint purpose, benefiting more than one cost objective, and not readily assignable to the cost objective specifically benefited without a whole lot of work. So your finance department. Okay, we could figure out how many entries CPF was in your for your finance department, get a percentage of how many that is of all the entries done for your agency, figure out what percent of the time it probably took to do those line items, and apply that to the salaries of the people that did it. That's a lot of work. You have something that's benefiting more than one cost objective. Financing for the finance department for your agency covers the accounting activities for your entire agency. It's not readily assignable to the objective. And there would be a whole lot of effort disproportionate to the results achieved. Other things that are indirect cost, accounting, phones could be that way, office supplies, office rent, building security, all things that meet these two bullets. Benefit more than one cost objective, not easily assignable. So what do we do with those costs? Well, we have two options. If your department or agency has a fairly negotiated indirect cost rate, which will not be most of you will not have this, but if you do, you can use it for the CPF grant. If you don't have an indirect cost rate, you can use the de minimis rate, which is 10% of the modified total direct cost. It's kind of your total cost. If you've got some weird cost in the activities, weird line items, you might not get to count them, but it's specified in 2 CFR Part 200.414 how to calculate your modified total direct costs. But it is 10% of that. And the beauty of the indirect cost rate is that you do not have to have any other documentation to support it. So no documentation is required to justify the 10% de minimis indirect cost rate. Now, if you need additional information or want additional information on indirect cost, on the CPF page, which we've got here, and we've got the link for you, there is supplemental information on indirect cost. Okay, budget amendments. We all know that budgets sometimes change. Sometimes prices go up, sometimes they go down. Sometimes we overestimated a cost and we'd like to move the money to somewhere else. So changes to an approved budget are permitted. Folks have to submit a revised budget and letter of justification on your letterhead to your grant officer. And the letter needs to include why you need the change, a detailed explanation of how the change is still consistent with the joint, the JES, the Joint Explanatory Statement. Here we're calling it congressional intent, and an explanation of why the change is needed. Now, you can continue to draw on the approved budget until the revised budget is approved, but you can't be reimbursed for the new line items until the new budget is approved. All right, and Jennifer, I think it's time to flip it back to you.
Okay, great.
You want me to keep sharing? You want me to stop? You want to take over?
I can take back over. That's fine.
Okay. All right.
All right, thank you, Stan. I'm working on sharing my screen. There we go. That look good? Can you see the
Yeah.
screen? Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank
Yep.
you. Wonderful. Okay, so
It was okay, yeah.
yeah, I got to move down to my stuff.
Yes, to your stuff. Yeah, that's why I was confused for a minute.
Sorry about that. All right, so thank you, Stan, for walking through that process. We did have a couple questions that I thought maybe we would take before we get into the DRGR section. So the first question asks, if we were doing only pre-development before construction starts and admin, would we still use the construction budget format? How can we avoid confusion? For example, we are not doing construction.
So yeah, that's not really going to confuse anyone. And remember, we have to put the money in for the entire project. So if we're doing pre-development with CPF money and we're going to construct it with other money, we would have the line, we need the line items for both the construction and the non-construction side.
Great.
And remember, those formats are, recommended but optional. So you absolutely can add line items to those, to what we were just reviewed.
And then the other question asks, would it make sense to put HVAC in miscellaneous or construction?
I mean, it's usually part of the construction.
Great. And somebody else asked, do we need two budgets?
No, one budget.
One budget. All right, great. Thanks everybody for those questions. If you have others, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will have a general Q&A session at the end of our time here together. But for now, we're going to talk a bit about DRGR. So for those of you who are new to these acronyms, DRGR stands for the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System. And people in past sessions have asked us, well, why are we using the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System? And so DRGR started as a HUD system for the CDBG DR grants. However, over time, the system has been flexible enough to allow other programs to also use it. And so most new programs that come out through HUD end up here in DRGR. Probably we need a new name for this system, but that is what it stands for, but it is not exclusive to disaster recovery. DRGR is the place where those of you who haven't begun submitting your materials, your grant materials, you will submit them through DRGR. That's not what we're talking about here today. You'll get more information on that process separately, which is why it's important to sign up for the list, the mailing list. But for today, we just want to talk about DRGR as it relates to your budget. So once you get to the point of having a signed grant agreement, then you'll start to turn your attention to this part of the process. So this is sort of a look ahead. I don't want anybody to be concerned that this is something they have to think about right now. But in DRGR, you are going to be building out your budgets for projects and activities so that you can process your vouchers and receive your grant funds. DRGR is set up like a hierarchical structure. So these stacking dolls are something I like to use to show people kind of how the different hierarchies fit within one another. So basically, you're going to have your total budget, which is going to be your grant budget. In some programs, there is program income, and that would be included as well. Most of you are not going to have program income, so it would just be your grant budget. You would then set up a project and then activities within that project. Within that project, you will create obligations within that activity, you will create obligations and then make the draws within that activity as well. All the detail in DRGR really lives at the activity level. And so you'll see that most of the build out comes at the activity level. It is where you do your draws. So that's where most of the budgeting also happens. But the sum of all the activities within a project cannot exceed the project budget. So it's just like these stacking dolls. And again, this is not something you're going to need to do immediately. You're going to wait until you have a signed grant agreement, and then HUD will go in and activate this so that you can set up your projects and activities. But when you do, it's going to look like this. So this is a screenshot of the inside of DRGR. You can see here, there is a submenu for projects and one for activities under Manage My Grants. The first step is always to set up your project, because the project is the bucket that contains all the activities. When you click on Add a Project, you're going to get this little breakout screen here. There's not a lot of information that's required for projects, just you have to establish a project number and title, give it a description, note the status, so whether it's underway, and then provide a budget amount. So that's the limited information you need to establish a project, but you need to do that before you can create that more detailed level of activities. For all of these steps that I'm going to describe, there is a DRGR quick guide on the HUD Exchange on the CPF page, as well as videos that will help you complete the steps for setting up projects and activities. This is the screen for setting up your activities. So again, you have this Manage My Grants module with an activities menu underneath. You click Add Activities, and then you have a screen to set up the components of your activity. This takes a little more information because this is where all the detail lives in the system. So your projects, giving it an activity type, an activity number, title, a description of your activity, the activity status, a start and end date, who the responsible organization is. Every activity needs to have a responsible organization associated with it. And then you're going to set up your budget. And that goes in this box here. And you save it. And whatever you set the budget as, that's the amount of funds you'll have available for obligation and then for draws. So we just wanted to give you kind of this heads up about DRGR so that you know what's coming, because it is directly related to budget, even if you're not having to worry about it immediately. But as I mentioned, there are lots of really good videos that walk you through step-by-step how to complete this for CPF grants. And so you can go to the HUD Exchange and access videos on submitting an action plan, adding activities, adding responsible organizations, establishing projects, setting up performance and accomplishment measures, and adding and changing users. And this number 6 is really one of the first things after you've gotten your materials submitted that you'll need to do, maybe even before. But this is where you're going to add additional people to be able to access DRGR and use it for the things that their role requires. So definitely, I would take a look at that video probably first. All right, and I think I saw another couple questions come in here, so I will go ahead and
Find them. All right.
Go ahead, Stan.
You can read them.
Oh, okay. So
No,
okay. Well, there was a follow-up question to whether someone needed to budget. They also asked, is our grant administrator an allowable expense?
Well, I'm not sure we can answer that without knowing a lot more about what they do, but if they are working directly on the implementation of the CPF grant, then the portion of their salary that they spend on the CPF grant would be an allowable expense.
Great, thank you. So this question asks, our 2023 CPF request and funding was only to equip a new emergency shelter. We will be receiving 2024 CPF funds to rehab or construct the shelter. Does my 23 budget only need to include the budget for equipping the shelter, or should it also include the overall project of construction?
We might need a grant officer or Connor to weigh in on this one, on what they would prefer.
Yeah, I think I can provide some context on this. So I mean, I would recommend that because each CPF award allocation is a law, I would recommend keeping, let me reread this question. Does my 23 budget only need to include the budget? I would keep, if what you're asking is should these two pots of funding be separate? I would say yes. So whatever your joint explanatory statement says for your FY23 project, that's what you should stick with your FY23 award. Your FY24 award, whatever the joint explanatory statement says for that, that's what you're allowed to do with your FY24 award. And I don't see a reason why we would require you to provide future information on the budget for your 23 award, meaning that like providing information on what you're going to do with it and for fiscal year 2024. But I mean, it wouldn't hurt to include that in your grant package. But we wouldn't necessarily require you to let us know what you're going to do with your FY24 CPF award. I hope I answered your question, Roxanne.
Great, thank you. If you need any follow-up, feel free to drop that in, but I think maybe you got it. She says thank you. Okay, next question. How are funds dispersed to organizations? Reimbursement with paid invoices that are submitted, partial disbursement upfront, full disbursement upfront, or other process? So you will be provided your funds by creating a voucher in DRGR. So in DRGR, there is a financial management module. You'll go in there, you'll create a voucher at the activity level to access your funds. And I suspect that guidance will be forthcoming on the level of detail and supporting documentation that you might need to create those vouchers. Typically, folks do process these on a reimbursement basis, and you'll do it through that vouchering process in DRGR. Right, any other questions? Drop them in the chat. I will go ahead and talk about our next few slides here, but we've got time, so please go ahead and add any information or add any questions into the chat. All right, so the next cohort opportunity is on April 25th. That's next Thursday. That is when we will be having the office hour session for budget. So for those of you who have not yet started your budget, your homework is to try to start the budget. Start diving into creating your budget so that you can come to office hours with any questions you may be encountering as you build that budget out. And a couple more questions came in, so let's see. Could you clarify what was said when we started? If we haven't completed our application by 4/15, we need to do so in DRGR. Close. So as of 4/15, so as of yesterday, if you have not submitted any application materials, and that was about 80% of you, if you have not submitted any materials yet, you will be doing your application through DRGR. And there will be upcoming webinars and additional guidance on how to do that. But just know that that is a transition that it has happened. So if you haven't submitted any materials by yesterday, then your submission process is going to be through DRGR. Can you log on there now? No, you cannot. Connor, what is the process for them to get access? I don't think they have access yet, do they? Or has somebody been getting
No. So yeah, so I can explain this a little bit. So DRGR access for our recently old process to where you are submitting your grant materials via email to your grant officer or the CPF grants inbox is that normally you would submit your grant application, it gets approved, you get a fully executed grant agreement that is signed by our office and your organization, and only once you get that executed grant agreement would we set you up in DRGR. So for those of you, which should be the vast majority of you that do not have an executed grant agreement for your CPF award, you will not have access to DRGR right now. But because of this new grant processing module that we're going to be introducing to you soon, that you're all going to be interacting with, our office is working on getting DRGR accounts set up for all of you and all of your organizations. Because of course you'll be needing to access DRGR in order to submit your grant package to thus get an executed grant agreement. So an email did go out about this, I believe, last Thursday or Friday to all the FY23 grantees that we have a record of having no material submitted. But we are going to be sending out an email with some additional information. It's going to be a little more detailed either this week or next week. And I did want to highlight that the training sessions for those the training sessions that are going to go over this new grant processing module are going to be on April 23rd and May 1st. And those dates are included in that email that went out last week, and it will be further highlighted for you in future communications and emails. And I see another question. Can a grantee give DRGR access to a consultant hired to assist with administering the CPF grant? Yes. So once you get set up in DRGR, DRGR access will be first given to whoever is listed as the authorized representative for the grant. Once that user is set up in DRGR and they can access DRGR, they will have permissions to go into the system and on their own put in and submit user requests for other users, whether it's staff members from your organization or consultants, so on and so forth. So yeah, long and short of it is that yes, your consultants will be able to access DRGR to help administer the grant.
Thank you. That's super helpful information. Okay. Okay, question about DRGR access. And remember that there is a video on providing access to those on your team to DRGR. Once the initial person is set up, they can go in and provide access to others who need it in order to implement the grant. But somebody asked, can a grantee give DRGR access to a consultant hired with administering the CPF grant? And yes, you can do that. All user requests have to be approved by HUD. So you would enter the information about that person, submit it to HUD, and then once that was approved, they would receive their own DRGR ID so that they could log in. There was a question, and I don't know, Stan, if your link to the JES was related to this, but there was a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Go
Right,
ahead.
yeah, if the question was, what's the link for the joint explanatory statement, I did put that in the chat.
Yeah.
I
Great.
wasn't
Thank you.
sure exactly. It says link for the descriptions to include in the narrative. But I
Perfect.
believe that that was a question about the JES, so.
I think you're
Great,
right.
okay.
Okay, next question. Our city has a contractor to administer a CDBG grant, and we are trying to get this log and information. We are onboarding a grant administrator, so I want to make sure we get all our information. Who would I reach out to get this info? I think you must mean your CPF grant, hopefully, because that's what we're here to talk about, not CDBG. And CDBG is implemented through IDIS. CPF is implemented through DRGR. So just to get all of our acronyms correct and lined up, we don't want to confuse anyone who might be new to these programs that's here with us today. So for your CPF grant, you'll be using DRGR, and we just explained that process for how you'll get access. But if you have any additional questions related to that, please do feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay. Let me go ahead and no more questions as of now. Feel free to keep popping those in the chat though, because we will keep an eye on that and answer them as they come through. But we would like to just promote our survey. So as part of all of these sessions, we are asking for feedback from you all by evaluation surveys. So you will be receiving an email from cohorts@tdainc.org. When you receive that email, we would greatly appreciate if you just took a few minutes to complete the survey. It does help us to make sure that we're providing you with the information that's helpful as you walk through your process of compiling all these materials. So please complete that survey. I don't see any additional questions coming in. Does anyone have anything additional they'd like to share? Connor, Stan, Danielle?
No, I
I'm
think I'm all
good.
set.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you all. Very, very good questions today. Great job on all the polls. Good answers. We will look forward to seeing you on April 25th.
Don't forget to start on your budget.
Yes, please start on your budget because that's going to allow you to really utilize that time at office hours to help you work through any obstacles, challenges, questions that you have that come up. All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you on the 25th.